everyone, welcome back to another TCG discussion video. Today I want to do a video on the 5 tips for getting into retro Pokemon TCG. Now if you don't know, I got into retro Pokemon TCG, I really started getting stuff together around 2020, 2019 was really started it, but 2021 was really like my breakout year, with 2022 following, where I just got a ton of stuff together, started making a ton of decks. Really I was resource gathering before then. And you know, I'll get into this in another video someday. I do want to talk about this, but retro has basically saved me from depression, from, you know, feeling a place of just nothingness in the Pokemon TCG, and that's why I talk about retro so much. That's why I share retro with other people, because I want to give people that same joy that retro gave me. However, there's things about retro that are different from building modern decks. That, you know, sounds a little obvious to say, but that is just par for the course when you're playing with cards that are usually much more expensive, and you know, things are different. So I have 5 tips today to help you get into retro. I have been doing retro now for, you know, 2 years, just playing decks, and then obviously I've had things going for a while. My first finished deck was in like mid-2020, but like really started to ramp up last year in 2022. So first thing I want to say is try before you buy. This is my first tip, try before you buy. And what do I mean by this? There's 2 different ways you can try before you buy. Obviously PTCGO is dead, you can't play older formats on PTCG Live because of the broken friend battle system in Expanded. However, there is still TCG1, that is an online service where you can play older formats, build older decks and play online, though it's not the greatest, I'll say. So, what else do I recommend? I recommend proxying. You don't have to have your proxies all look as nice as these, but here is my Empoleon Dusknoir deck for Legacy. And proxying allows you to cheaply build a deck without spending all of the money on this. I spent about $2 on this pack of cheap Amazon sleeves. The printer ink probably cost about $2 in itself. And the cards behind it cost like 60 cents because it's all a bunch of basic energies. Please, if you just don't be afraid of proxying, and the reason I say this is that sometimes you're going to build a format or build a specific deck and you're going to hate it. Usually when you build a lot of a format, let's just say I have like 18 2010 Worlds decks, I know which decks I'm going to like and I know which decks I'm going to dislike at this point. But when you're newer to a format, when you're newer to retro in general, you're not always going to know that. Please, please try before you buy. Proxy decks to make sure you actually want to build what you're building and test it. So, just like this right here, this Legacy deck right here. Give proxying a try before you buy so you don't spend all that money and then end up selling it later on. My next tip is build popular eras. Now this is, you know, obviously up to yourself. If you just don't want to build popular eras, maybe you have a favorite part of the game, then go ahead and build that. And obviously it's your decision. I have a deck right here. This is from 2014 NXDXY. It is Verizon Genesect. And this is not a particularly popular era. Yes, people do play 2014 online a bit, but it's not like an era you're going to have a lot of tournaments to enter with. It's not a very popular era. Why do I recommend playing popular eras? Because you want people to play with. Ultimately, when you build decks like this, you're not going to get to play them very often unless you force your IRL friends to play it with you. When you're playing online, playing with webcams, playing at official tournaments where there's side events, like what we had at this year's North American International Championship. There was a 2017 Primal Clash Guardians Rising tournament. You want to play formats that are going to be featured at these things or played with webcam so that you have people to play with. I'll tell you, I have a lot of decks. Right here, 2022 Sword and Shield Brilliant Stars. I have played this deck 3 times since I built it. I do like the deck and the whole format is a passion project for me, but I have played the deck 3 times. Because people are not building that format. You want to build popular formats, that way you're getting your use out of your money and you actually get to play the decks that you build. Passion projects are fine, but try to get into retro further and know which formats you want to do as a project before you actually just go and spend on it right away. Some eras to maybe consider. I don't have any built, but 2006 is really popular. 2006 RSPK, the EX block format is really popular. My favorite format of all time, 2010 Worlds. Consider that as a popular format if you want to build that. I have 2004 Worlds, which is relatively popular. It's not very, very popular, but it's got a following. I've got 2018 Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder here. Here is a Decidueye Zoroark deck. This is a really popular format as of late. There's a lot of cool decks in this format, and it's really cheap to get into, so I recommend that one too. Here is Primal Clash Guardians Rising, a lot more of an expensive format nowadays because of Gym Leader Challenge raising the cost of Floatstones, Bridgets, and cards like Versus Seeker, but it's still, you can get most decks for under $100, so I also recommend this format. So these are just some popular formats. 2004, very expensive. 2010, pretty expensive. These two, not so much. My third tip is to look and plan lists. At the beginning of this video, I said that I spent about 2 years just kind of scraping the mud. Obviously, I did have this deck right here, Verizon Genesect. I built this in the middle of 2020, had it done. Started building in 2019, but all around that period, I was kind of just scraping pieces off the ground. I was buying a lot of different pieces that I saw other people putting in decks in eras that I thought looked cool, but there was a complete aimlessness. And what ultimately ended up happening, I'll just go get it right now, I suppose, since I have time with the camera. This is a great example right here. I was just going into shops and just buying anything I saw that was playable. Here is Ariados and Spinarak. These are in like one playable deck from 2016. But because I just bought whenever I saw something playable, I have a lot of extra Spinaraks and Ariadoses. And you can see that right there. There are far worse cases like this in my collection. I have like 20 Combees from Stormfront, and I have never used a single one in a deck. Try to avoid at all costs buying cards just for the sake that they're playable unless you're just building everything. And that building everything, we'll get on that later, it's not the best thing to do. So you want to look and plan lists. Use websites like TCG Legends. Maybe you have a person you look up to. James G from 2010 Deck List has a lot of great deck lists for the 2010 Worlds format. Jeremy Evans has a bunch of archived deck lists, but I really recommend TCG Legends as well. It gives you a wide breadth of decks, retro decks, not always updated lists, but still it's a great place to start. You want to plan exactly what you want to buy. You do not want to buy extra because, trust me, it will sit, it will collect dust. You will spend years. I have still pieces that I have bought from like 2017, 2018 for decks that I never used, and it is still collecting dust because I still have not gotten around to building retro decks for them. So be very specific, buy exactly what you need, and don't buy extras. Promise, hoarding is not going to help you. My tip number 4, don't worry about the bling. This is a really big one. So right here you can see that I have a deck that I blinged out quite a bit. This is my Chandelure deck. It's got lots of pretty cards in it. It's not fully blinged out, but it's pretty blinged out. And this deck cost me probably like $200 to make. It's not that bad. However, let's go get a deck that did cost me a lot of money to make. That would be the Magma deck, which is right next to me actually this whole time. Let's show you Magma. Here's a deck that I spent around $700 making. It is a fully reverse, besides a few cards, Team Magma deck from the 2004 format. I have not built a single other 2004 deck to play it against, so I've played this deck 0 times, and it has just sat collected dust. The thing about bling is that it looks nice, but you don't need it. And I say that as someone with some bling decks. Here is a 2010 Kurskar list, my favorite deck of all time. And I don't regret having bling for this because it ended up being my favorite deck of all time. Here is an example of all the bling cards. However, when you go into a format, please, when you're getting into retro, don't buy all the bling. There is a lot of decks from the 2011 Harkle's Silver and Noble Victories format. There's some decks from the 2010 format. And there's like all kinds of decks from like 2017 and stuff that I built. 2014 that I built, that I bought bling for, and I regret it. And the reason that I bought bling is I was just like, oh, well, yeah, I'm just going to bling everything out. It cost an excessive amount of money, and ultimately some of these decks I don't get to play that much. So it's not worth it to me to bling it out. Some of these decks I don't regret because they ended up being my favorites, but if you end up having a favorite deck, why don't you just bling it out later? There's nothing hurting to do it later. You can always buy some copies of a staple supporter that look cooler, put it in that deck, and then move the other copies to a different deck that you want to build. So don't worry about the bling. Focus on what you want to just build the deck. You don't have to go always min rarity. Get some cards that look cool, but don't focus on your bling. And my tip number 5, this is going along with what I said earlier. You want to know your limits. You cannot build everything. You cannot build everything in Retro. I know Jeremy Evans, someone I talked about earlier, he is making an attempt to build literally everything. He has almost 300 Retro decks. Valkyrie, another person who has like 300 Retro decks. I'm saying this while having like 70 finished Retro decks, that you simply cannot build everything. So, what do I recommend here? Know your limits of what you can and cannot build, especially if you're on a budget, if you know that you have bills to pay, if you know that maybe you're only like 17 and you only have like a part-time job that you're working to fund it. Fund what you want. Do not fund everything. You don't need to build 45 decks for every format. You don't need to build every single format there ever was. Find your favorites, pick and choose exactly what you want to do. And then secondly, what I recommend here is that buy World Championship decks if you do not mind them, and buy Japanese cards if you do not mind them. Here I have a 2011 Worlds Magnazone deck, and the list isn't great. I'm going to be honest, some of the lists, especially the older World Championship decks, they don't age that well. But it cost me about $100 for this full deck. As opposed to real life, right now this would cost me about $200 to buy all the cards in like moderately played or better condition. So, don't be afraid of World Championship decks. I know it can be, taunting that you just want to build lists with real cards. A lot of times maybe you want to build it even max rarity, but you're just going to end up spending a lot more money than you need to sometimes, especially for eras that you don't care about. Like 2016, I'm not a big fan of that format. I think the format is dookie, so I bought the 4 World Championship decks, and that's probably going to be the most I spend on the format for now. 2017, 2018, both alright formats, but I have better formats for those years, so I just bought the Worlds decks because they are cheap, they're easy to buy, and they get the job done. You can still have a fun time playing Retro even with just these Worlds lists. Trust me, they're still very fun. And then buying World Championship, buying Japanese, that's just a great thing in general if you want to save money. Here is a Donphan Prime deck I have built, and this is an example I talked about earlier. I have decks that you regret building, maybe. This is one of them. I'm not a huge fan of this deck at all, but as you can see, there's a lot of World Championship cards in this deck, and that made it cheaper to build, so it wasn't as much of a blow when I ended up not liking it. So I highly recommend taking advantage of World Championship cards. Maybe you find them in bulk, maybe you buy them online. World Championship cards are a great asset, even if it's just for staple cards. Maybe you make a rule to yourself where it's like, okay, I gotta buy the Pokemon, but maybe the trainers can be World Championship cards. Maybe the Gold Star can be a World Championship card to save some money. And, use Celebrations cards, the same thing. Anything that helps it make it cheaper for you, even if you just want to proxy things, don't be afraid to proxy single cards in your deck if it's going to save you $500 for like a Gold Star, right? Because ultimately what Retro is about having fun. Do not spend too much money to the point where you don't get to actually build what you want to build. Again, use PTCG Legends, use resources like Jeremy Evans' collection if you follow him on Twitter. Even my collection, maybe my collection can be an inspiration to you on what to build, and I hope it is, because ultimately Retro is so much fun, and I just want to share this joy with everyone. So, thank you all so much for watching my tips. Oh my god, the glare is awful on that. Thank you all for watching my 5 tips on Retro. So just to recap, try before you buy, don't be afraid to proxy things, build popular eras like 2006, 2010, 2004, 2018 somewhat, 2017 Primal Clash Guardians Rising, build popular eras. So plan lists so that you're not buying excess stuff that you don't need. So use resources like PTCG Legends, like I previously mentioned. Don't worry about bling. I know it sounds hypocritical saying this with some fully bling decks right in front of you, but you're going to be a lot better off for especially newer eras when you just take things lightly. Here's a nice not bling deck, and it looks great. It still plays great too. The deck doesn't play any differently when you put shiny cards in it. And lastly, you can't build everything. Know your limits, choose your formats that you want to build, buy World Championship Japanese cards, use Celebrations prints, use anything to make it cheaper so that you're not just spending as much money as possible. Because ultimately, if you spend less money on certain decks, that means you get to buy more decks. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.